Hello, it's Charlie from Silent to Talkies, with the next episode in a series during which I will investigate why a silent star's talkie stardom did not stick. This episode will focus on the great Douglas Fairbanks, one of the biggest movie stars of the 19-teens, the 1920s, before making only 5 talkies before his retirement, and one of those was a documentary. It could be argued that due to his years of work and enormous popularity, Doug was one of the biggest movie stars of the silent film era, only surpassed in popularity by his wife, Mary Pickford. The evidence speaks for itself. He entered films in 1914 already an above-the-title star due to his star-making appearances on Broadway. By 1916, he was number 8 in box office moneymakers. By 1917 and 18, he was number 1. He remained in the top 5 through 1925, was number 8 in 1926, number 13 in 1927, and 17 in 1928 before falling out of the top 25 list in 1929. But that doesn't necessarily mean he had lost all of his fame or success by the time he made his talkie debut that year. He had just slowed down the number of films he had made, and there were lots more stars on the scene now. His final silent with a talking introduction was The Iron Mask in 1929, and it was a huge hit, making over $1 million at the time. But he only ended up making 5 talkies in all before walking away. The goal of this episode will be to find any new answers to why that happened. I first became aware of Doug's enormous body of work through Chronicle of the Cinema, a huge coffee table book about movies to commemorate its 100th anniversary in 1995 that my grandfather owned. I also read about him in Oscar history books, he hosted the first awards ceremony, and in various other silent film books, including Silent Stars by Janine Basinger. Doug's films were some of the first silents that I ever watched. I remember renting 1917's Wild and Woolly from Netflix when DVDs were still delivered by them in the mail. I also rented 2 of his talkies from the local library, Reaching for the Moon and The Taming of the Shrew. I even paid my respects to him as memorial at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in 2008. To say that I have been a huge Douglas Fairbanks fan is an understatement. When someone messaged me and asked if I was doing an episode about Doug, I thought the time had come for me to revisit his career, so here we are. I really appreciate that person messaging me because it has reminded me how much I enjoy watching Doug's films, both silents and talkies. There's a vitality in his performances that has never been equaled by any other actor then or now. Basinger writes in her book, he had something else that every star must have, magnetism. When Fairbanks is on the screen, you don't feel like looking at anyone else. He glows with good health and energy. He commands your attention. The commonly held idea about his lack of talkies is slightly different than Jack Gilbert, but along the same lines. He simply wasn't suited for talkies. He, like Jack, was another inspiration for the lead character in the film The Artist, about an actor that cannot adjust to the new medium. Critics and historians have commented that Doug's swashbuckling characters had fallen out of fashion by the time the talkies arrived, and that this led to him losing popularity with audiences, but I'd like to investigate today the validity of those claims. I'll be looking through box office returns and reviews to see for myself why Doug retired from the talkies so early. As usual, I will go back to the beginning and chronicle his early life, early acting experiences, and silent film career before I get to his talkies. However, I've had to limit the number of Doug silents that I discuss and show to you because amazingly, all of them but 5 survived. That's right. All of his silent films but 5 survived. So 40 plus silent films not only survive, but are available and free to watch online, and I will tell you where you can. Now, let's go back to the beginning, shall we? Douglas was born Douglas Ullman in 1883 to Hezekiah Charles Ullman and Ella Marsh Ullman. Charles was Ella's 3rd husband and former lawyer. Douglas had one older brother, Robert. They eventually moved to Denver, Colorado when Doug was 5. Around that time, his father also left. In anger, his mother had the entire family take the last name of her first husband, Fairbanks. According to Basinger, Doug had his first brush with the stage in 1898 at the age of 15 when he performed in Living Pictures, a children's matinee. He was listed as being an acting student. A year later, Doug went on tour with a Shakespeare company. By 1902, he was on Broadway and appeared in Her Lord and Master. He appeared in 7 more plays over the next 4 years before appearing in his first starring role as Perry Carter Wainwright in The Man of the Hour. Doug starred in 9 more plays over the next 8 years. Notable roles included Bud Haynes in The Girl from Mississippi, Steve Oldham in The Cub, a lead in The Gentleman of Leisure, Hawthorne in Hawthorne of the USA, and Bertie in The New Henrietta. His last Broadway appearance ended in May of 1915 in The Show Shop. Meanwhile, in 1907, Doug had married Beth Sully, a wealthy heiress. Beth gave birth to their son, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., in 1909. Briefly during Doug Jr.'s infancy, Doug Sr. worked in a business before returning back to the stage. However, in 1915, Harry Aitken of the Triangle Film Corporation lured Doug away from Broadway with an offer to star in the movies. The film in question was 1915's The Lamb, which saw him already as a leading man above the title. Basinger writes that in his first film, Fairbanks stands out in the frame, causing those around him to pale in comparison. He had more than just his fabulous looks and the kind of vitality the camera responds to. He had stage presence, physical skills, and solid comic ability. The Lamb set the pattern for Doug's early years as a star. He's a resolutely cheerful go-getter who always comes out on top no matter what the odds. Not to sound cliche, but a star was truly born after the release of The Lamb. Doug's first movie of 1915, which saw him betraying two characters in a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type situation, was Double Trouble. It also further showcased Doug's comedic talents to the public, which became his drawing power for audiences, at least until 1920. Double Trouble concerned mild-mannered banker Florian Amadon, who gets robbed and knocked out. He wakes up 5 years later and has to figure out how he got to where he is. Under a psychic's hypnosis, he realizes that he has lived as Jean Brasfield, a lecherous ladies' man out to make some money. As you can see in this first scene, Doug totally loses himself in Florian. He's mild-mannered, clumsy, bumbling, and he loses his cool when the lovely Elizabeth, played by Marjorie Wilson, enters. As the title slide points out, a woman sends his heart into a flutter of fear. But notice the very sharp contrast in the next clip of Doug playing Florian's alter ego, Jean. He has no problem talking to the beautiful lady now, and is quite cocky, brash, and lecherous. It's a complete 180 and shows the extent of Doug's dramatic abilities. Seeing Florian definitely shocked me, as I'd never seen him play such an insecure character before. According to film historian Sean Axmaker, the film was released to commercial and critical acclaim. Audiences, who already were won over by Doug's debut in The Lamb, seem to love him even more now. The New York Times stated in their interview that Douglas Fairbanks is one of the cleverest actors playing before the camera. I'm sorry, that was the review. It's easy to see why D.W. Griffith at Triangle Film Corporation gave him a contract before his first film even opened. Axmaker also confirms my surprise about Doug's portrayal in Double Trouble. He writes, Double Trouble displays Fairbanks' talents as a character actor, and it's the first and last time he would play a villain, even in the comedic vein. It's interesting to ponder how Doug's career would have differed if his villainous side had been built up more than his heroic side, but it was not to be. Aside from another curiosity in his filmography that I'll discuss in a moment, he would go on to play a confident, heroic protagonist like Jean in Double Trouble without the lecherous side from now on. Whether these heroes were comedic, swashbuckling, or both, they came to define the formula, if you will, that audiences expected a Fairbanks picture to fit. Doug was everyone's heroes in motion pictures. I'm going to talk about two of his 1916 films because both are significant to his career. The first was the Western comedy, The Good Bad Man, which was the first time that Doug not only starred, but was also credited as the writer and producer of the same picture. The film saw Doug playing Passin' Through, a drifting Robin Hood type outlaw that steals from the rich to donate to charity. Along the way, he meets and falls in love with Amy, played by Bessie Love, in the first of their several films together. Part of the storyline concerns Passin' Through not knowing about his childhood or his family, which is revealed to him in this scene. Although most of the film is melodrama, this scene stood out to me because of its darker, dramatic nature. Look at the subtleties of sadness found in Doug's facial expressions. It was certainly a departure from the cocky hero, and showed that not only could Doug play a hero, but a hero with depth and layers of emotions. It was another hit and got Doug rave reviews that singled out his acting and his writing. Photography writes, in writing a story so well suited to the production of a good, wholly interesting, melodramatic picture, Mr. Fairbanks attained something for which he deserves praise. Oscar Cooper in Motion Pictures News wrote, The Good Bad Man is one of those pictures which the reviewer feels absolutely justified in commending highly to the exhibitor. Fairbanks is a magnetic central figure throughout. Doug made other comedic hits during 1916, but his most curious film of that year, or any other year, was The Mystery of the Leaping Fish, a bizarre comedy satire about cocaine use. Doug played Detective Coke Any Day, pun intended, a cocaine-using version of Sherlock Holmes that helps out a woman played by Bessie Love. According to Doug's biographer, Jeffrey Vance, Doug hated the film and tried to get it shelved to no avail. Out of respect to Doug, I'm not going to show it to you here, but can tell you that it's on YouTube and has to be seen to be believed. However, as bizarre and silly as it is, Doug commits 100% to the character in one of his most physically comedic performances. He truly embodies the zaniness of someone named Coke Any Day. I know you are probably asking yourself, as I was, why did this film even get made? Why does it exist in the first place? I will keep trying to find that answer. Stay tuned now for Douglas Fairbanks Part 2.